So and the nice thing about carbon taxation is we create a revenue stream that then can be used to ameliorate those effects on low-income households. Some of the work we've done suggested that if you just rebated that as a check to everyone, $25 ton tax would raise enough to have a rebate to everyone in the country of about $2,000, $2,100, rising up to like maybe $3,000, $4,000 by 2050. As the carbon tax rises up, you're charging on less emissions, so that's a trend downward, but of course the price is rising up. So if you did that, if you had that rebate to every household, each household was getting $2,100 a year, pretty good deal, and something like 60 to 70% of people in the country, if you look across income levels, would actually be better off with that. Then they would get more money in that rebate than they would pay for increased energy. I mean, the other thing I want to talk a little bit is, this public infrastructure idea. As economists, we just say, put a carbon tax on, get on with it, that's the whole solution. I think we do have to think about, if we had a carbon tax, how do we make it possible for people to do something different, given that it's there? So we do want to think about, what is the public infrastructure for transportation and zoning in communities that could make it possible and less expensive for people to get to work other ways or live in a way that they don't have to commute as much. So those are important considerations as we go forward. So I think that was a little warning sign. I think I'll stop there, and if there are questions at the end, I'll be happy to try to answer them.
Thank you very much. I actually have lots of questions for you, as I'm sure I will for everybody. Unfortunately, we don't have time right now to entertain those questions. So let's move on to our next speaker, Gary Rucinski. Gary's going to talk a little bit about carbon tax, but also about getting back to pre-industrial CO2 levels, and also about farmland and farm and rangeland management.
Right, thank you, Larry. So my name is Gary Rucinski. First of all, thank you, Larry and Teresa, for setting up this panel. I really appreciate it. For all of the panelists who were able to attend. So I have a PhD in physics, and I've been working primarily in the software industry for the last 35 years. But 7 years ago, I began volunteering with an organization called Citizens Climate Lobby, and they are they're an interesting organization. They started about 10 years ago, and they have a single policy proposal that they have been working on in Washington, D.C. For that time, and that is, as John mentioned, the idea of a carbon tax. In that time, I've been down to Washington 9 times. I've had about 50 meetings with members of Congress on the issue of trying to do a carbon tax nationwide. And after 7 years, I saw that the policy discussion wasn't going very quickly, and decided that maybe something else was called for, and that's why I'm now into this mode of running for office. But in that time, I've also become aware of a couple of other things. So, as John mentioned, the problem of greenhouse gas emissions, or excess greenhouse gas emissions, is largely an economic problem that can be solved with economics. But the physics of climate change is such that, again, as he mentioned, there is a buildup of excess, primarily carbon dioxide, in the atmosphere at this point, and the residence time of that chemical is going to be 1,000 years or so. And we're now up to about 410 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is about 130 parts per million, or almost 50% more than was at pre-industrial times. James Hansen, I consider him the world's premier climate scientist, has calculated that even a safe level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is probably closer to 350 parts per million. And he's not even sure about that. He thinks it could be well lower than that in terms of trying to preserve the climate and the geography that we have come to recognize as Earth. So I began thinking about the problem of not just how do we reduce future emissions, but how do we actually pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere? And there's a third element of this, which is that what if we don't get emission reductions quickly enough? And what if we don't pull enough carbon out of the atmosphere quickly enough? And we get to a point in 10 or 15 years where we have to deploy what I call measures of last resort in order to reduce the amount, for example, of high heat index days that can actually kill people sitting at rest in the shade if the temperature gets too high. We've already seen conditions like this in countries like Iran and Pakistan. And as we go forward, and as we see even in New England, we are seeing more and more of these very high temperature days, and they're going to become more common as we go forward. So 10 or 15 years down the road, it's not hard to imagine that there will be a clamoring for somebody to do something to lower the temperature worldwide in order to reduce these conditions and to bridge us into a future where we do reduce the greenhouse gas concentration in the atmosphere to pre-industrial levels. So I'm actually talking about these three things. The revenue neutral carbon tax in order to reduce future emissions and therefore keep the damage that we do under control. The need to sequester carbon so that we can go back to that pre-industrial level or near pre-industrial level of greenhouse gas concentration. And then, like I said, the need to do some research into what's termed geoengineering in order to be able to have the research at hand should it become necessary for us to take deliberate kind of mechanical response to this higher climate. A lot of people are very concerned when we start talking about carbon tax because it has the word tax in it. We go back and forth at Citizens Climate Lobby, whether we call it a tax or a fee. We sort of prefer to call it a fee because actually what we propose is returning 100% of the proceeds to households on an equal basis. When you do that, it actually helps the economy. We had a study done by an economic modeling firm, and what we found was that emissions would be reduced by 50% relative to what would otherwise be the baseline in 20 years. We would actually increase the number of jobs in the United States by 2.8 million over 20 years. Those are jobs that simply won't materialize if we go forward with policies that we currently have on the books. Household incomes will rise, premature deaths will decrease because of reduced soot in the atmosphere and that sort of thing. And so overall, the idea of a revenue neutral carbon fee with 100% dividend return, as well as border adjustments in order to prevent companies from exporting pollution overseas and then just bringing their goods back in while avoiding any sort of a carbon tax on them, can just be good all the way down as far as the American economy is concerned. And so I think we need to get that message out there more and more. The second thing, when it comes to reducing the amount of carbon dioxide already in the atmosphere, there's a huge potential opportunity for sequestering carbon dioxide back in soil. And that's to rely on photosynthesis and biology, which are the two processes that got us fossil fuels in the first place. 100 years ago, we took a turn in this country and worldwide towards this kind of industrial agriculture where we rely on a lot of chemicals and inputs in order to grow our food. We also mismanage our grazing animals in such a way that we degraded grasslands across the United States and around the world through overgrazing and mismanagement of them. Both of those, the agriculture and the rangeland management, present huge opportunities for rebuilding topsoil in these degraded grassland areas that we think of them as deserts, but they're actually semi-arid areas where there used to be 6-foot tall switchgrass growing. And that grass grew in symbiosis with the herds of bison in the United States. that were roaming out there. We had about 1 billion bison in the western United States before we moved off into that area and we began killing off bison for various reasons. But if we can bring back, not so much, we don't need to reintroduce wild herds of bison out west. What we need to do is get our ranchers to use management methodologies that actually simulate what would be nature's way of animals grazing intensely in one area and then moving off to another area or allowing the first area to recover and so on. And then do that very systematically and observe what's happening on the ground to build up topsoil. And topsoil is carbon. And there are studies that show that you can sequester about a ton of carbon dioxide per acre through a management methodology like that. And if we were to apply that worldwide on the 15 billion acres of semi-arid degraded grasslands that exist, then we'd be able to pull down enough carbon dioxide that we could get back to pre-industrial levels in this century. The third thing, geoengineering, I don't really have a lot to say about that. I think that we need to fund research into geoengineering at the federal level, which would be just a standard research agenda carried on by professionals, hired by the government, or a system of grants put out to researchers at universities and colleges to look into how we can manage the temperature should it get to be too high, whether or not we can bridge key species or critical ecosystems through this period while we're waiting for emission reductions and carbon sequestration to happen. So I guess I don't really have very much more to say, but I will say that I'll just put in a shameless plug for myself, which is that this thinking that we need to use a revenue-neutral carbon fee, we need to revise the farm bill so that we're actually using farm and rangeland to sequester carbon rather than emit carbon, and to take this precautionary approach of doing geoengineering research. This is a very straightforward agenda that does allow, if we get it right, the ability to go hands-off and to stop trying to really control in detail and micromanage what's going to happen in the economy. And we could get back to dealing with many of the other battles and fights that we have on our hands as far as other cultural issues and economic issues that we have to deal with. So, shameless plug, aside from voting for me, I can also encourage you to get involved with some organizations that are working on these agendas. One of them is Citizens Climate Lobby. Another one is called Soil for Climate. They're working on the problem of, they're actually working in the state legislature in Massachusetts to introduce a healthy soils bill, biodiversity for a livable climate, and also a national organization called the Healthy Climate Alliance. All of these organizations can present you with the information we need to be an effective advocate. So thanks again to our organizers and for taking climate change seriously.
Thank you very much, Gary. Our next speaker is a local person from Newton, Emily Norton, and she is going to talk. We're going to move down from sort of a more global perspective down to more of a state and local perspective. Emily's going to talk more about how local cities and towns might, what sort of actions they can take, as well as Massachusetts.
Thank you so much. And now the moment of truth. Okay. Didn't do my usual practice of testing it beforehand, so we're gonna hope this will go. Look at that. Okay, love that. Okay, so first, again, just want to thank Larissa and Larry for organizing this. I want to thank my co-panelists for being here. I want to thank Gary for being willing to run for office. I can attest it can be really scary, and what he's doing is way scarier than what I ever did. And I do want to thank my photographer, Wyatt over there, who's making sure that this is all captured. I just thought it would be helpful to start out with some very basic facts. We know that climate change is bad and scary. Really highly recommend this book. Joseph Rome writes with plain English. And here I just pulled some factoids from it. Some of these have been covered. But in general, greenhouse effect is a good thing, makes life on Earth possible. As Gary had mentioned, the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere are much higher than they've been. They're over 400 parts per million, which is the terminology that's used. This is the first time they have ever been that high when there have ever been human beings on the planet. Okay, it used to be around 250 or so parts per million until the Industrial Revolution. So they have never been this high. Well, there have been Homo sapiens walking the planet. It was hundreds of thousands of years ago they were higher. And they were the sea level at that point was 50 to 80 feet higher. Emissions today are 6 times what they were in 1950, and the Earth has warmed 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit since 1900, 1 degree of that since 1970. So things are happening much more rapidly. I mean, I think we just heard Gary speaks in a very understated way, but we are getting to the